Hello, welcome to FM Live. My name is Mike Usrey, and today we're going to be talking about VMax coilovers. Now, this is specific to NA and NB Miatas, so if you have an NC or ND, sorry, we'll try to catch you in a future video on a product that's more applicable to those chassis, but today we're focusing purely on the VMaxes, which we carry for the first two generations of Miata. Now, before I get started with this, I would like to add that if you have any questions or comments about these coilovers, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. And if you have questions, we'll try to answer it throughout the video. I will be talking about quite a few things, so hopefully we'll answer most of those questions preemptively. But if I don't, please make sure that's in the comments and we'll try to get it towards the end of the video. So thank you very much again for joining. My name is Mike, and let's go ahead and get started talking about VMaxes. So VMax, what is a VMax? So they're coilovers. VMax is a company based in the Netherlands. We've actually been dealing with VMax coilovers for well over a decade at this point. We might even be creeping up on 2. They have been a very good brand for us as far as bang for buck, and that is because you get a lot of features packaged into these coilovers without having to spend a whole bunch of money. So let's talk about some of these features and why you might want VMaxes for your NA or NB Miata. So over here on the left-hand side, I've got rears. Over here, I've got some fronts. They are a little bit different, and I'll try to treat them and talk about them separately just because that way we're comparing apples to apples as much as possible. But we do actually have several different variants of VMaxes. Now, before I get into the details of what differentiates them, all of these VMaxes are going to be a single piece shock body. It's a monotube style shock absorber that is a steel body. They have threaded bodies most of the length of the actual shock body itself. They will have usually 1, if not 2 springs on them. Kind of depends on what shocks we're talking about, and I'll get to that in a little bit later. But they also feature either adjustable damping on some of them, and some of them do not. And again, we'll cover that in a little bit. But these shock absorbers are very straightforward. They probably look a lot like other shock absorbers you've seen on the market for Miatas and other vehicles. So if you're familiar with the term coilover, meaning generally that it has an adjustable lower spring perch, that's what we're talking about here today. So let's see. The first thing I should note is that, like I mentioned, these are VMax. That is a brand. VMax does sell these in Europe as well as elsewhere. We do like them quite a bit, but we've actually worked with VMax directly to make these our own in a sense. All of our VMaxes have spring rates that we've actually set up and chosen for each of the platforms as necessary and each of the applications as necessary, which we'll get into the differences in just a little bit. But these are not off-the-shelf shocks. They do actually come to Flyin Miata with different specifications as compared to buying them from VMax directly or any other vendor that carries VMaxes. So keep that in mind as we talk about these in particular. Let's see. I talked about them being monotube and single body. So just to kind of touch on that a little bit more here, because they are a simpler style coilover, one that helps keep any kind of additional weight down. We're not talking about a 2-piece shock absorber where there's multiple parts and multiple construction things that you have to worry about. I'm not going to get into the whole preload thing. There's a whole video about that. So if you'd like to compare 1-piece versus 2-piece shocks and why preload is not something that you should be considering when shopping for coilovers, we'll put a comment in the comment section with a link to that video where Keith talks about that. But the other big benefit to being a single piece monotube shock is that it's a cost savings. So not only does it cost less to be produced, but that means we don't have to charge you anywhere near as much as some of the fancier shocks that have either like multiple piece shocks sometimes. Can be more expensive, or if it is a twin tube shock or something along those lines, or multiple adjustments beyond a monotube setup like this. So it helps keep the cost down and the price for everybody, which is always a good thing. Let's see. Let's go ahead and talk about the options now that we've kind of covered what the heck is a VMax. So we'll start over here because I have all 3 options for the rear shocks. So starting on the far left here, we have the VMax Classic shocks. So the Classic is basically the most cost-effective option to do a coilover on your NA or NB. And this features adjustable spring perch, so that way you can set your ride height. And it is otherwise relatively straightforward, basic other than that. You don't have to worry about anything else except for setting your ride height. We already spec out the springs that are needed. It does not have a adjustment knob for damping control. So basically install it, set your ride height, go get your alignment, you're done. Easy peasy. And because it doesn't have any more adjustments, it is the least expensive option. So if you're not looking for a whole bunch of adjustment, or you don't really care to fiddle with adjustments because you're not going to the track on weekends or stuff like that, this is a really good option to lower your car, refresh your suspension with something new and something that works well out of the box without breaking the bank. Besides the Classic, we have the VMax Xtreme Sport and the Track. And between these two, they look awful similar. And that's because they are actually the same shock body between the two. Xtreme, got to say it with 2 X's. I hope you caught that. That just means that it has the adjustable damping knobs down here at the bottom on, these are the rears, and the front's same thing on the bottom. So if you see those adjustable damping knobs, that just means it's one of the Xtreme versions of the shock body, which same basic construction as the Classics, just with that adjustment that you can dial it up or dial it down, so that way you can better match whatever springs you have on the shocks themselves. But the shock bodies are the same. So the difference between the Sport and the Track Xtreme models are simply the spring rates. So on the Sports, let's see, let me check my cheat sheet here. They are 391 inch-pounds for the front springs and 258 for the rear. Comparing that to the Track variant, which is 504 inches for the front and 336 for the rear. So that is the difference between the Sport and the Track. So if you've ever wondered why we have 3 different flavors and what's the difference between them, really it's just 2 different shocks without adjustment, with damping adjustment, and then different spring rates. Now, I didn't talk about the spring rates on the Classics, and that's because they share the same spring rates as the Sports. So the Sport models are really this happy medium of, you have a little bit more adjustment because you don't have to, or basically you do get the adjustable damping on the Sport versus the Classic, but you share the same spring rates compared to the Tracks that are adjustable damping plus the stiffer rates. So if you're looking for kind of a happy medium between the two, or you're not quite sure if the car is going to develop into a track car just yet, you can start with Sports. And then later on, we do sell the Track springs separately, and you can get those on their own. Vice versa, if you start with Track, you can also go to the Sports. So there's a little bit of adjustability there that you can swap back and forth between. I will note that for the spring rates that we have here, they're not at the absolute top and bottom of the ranges for the damping control on these shocks, but they're really close. So basically, we took the available damping curves from the VMax Xtreme shock, and we paired it with kind of pretty much very close to the top and bottom spring rates that pair well with the damping, so that way you don't have to guess at, what's a good track spring versus what's a good daily driving, still good sporty street spring. We kind of gave you that range, and it's not a really wide range to begin with. So could you put different springs on this as long as they're in between that range that I gave you earlier? You can. But these are not your standard 2.5 or even 2.25 inch springs. These are actually metric. Remember, they're from the Netherlands. So they're 60 millimeter diameter springs. It's very difficult to find here in North America. So if you want to, yeah, you can. But generally speaking, we find that most people find themselves happy with one or the other spring rates that we already provide with the Classic and Sport or the Track. Another important thing to note is that because the Classic is not adjustable, those spring rates, the Classic and Sport spring rates, that's all you need. That's all you can run. If you try to put the Track rates on the Classics, it's going to be a very bouncy, uncontrolled kind of ride quality. We don't recommend it. That's why we don't have a non-adjustable shock with the Track spring rates. Hopefully that clears it up. If you need a little bit more clarification beyond that, drop us a comment or maybe give us a call and we can help you further. But hopefully that clears up most of it. Generally speaking, that's why we have the 3 different flavors, but are really just 2 different shocks and 2 different spring rates. That's it. Let's see. So talking about adjustments, I've already mentioned that, yes, they do have the adjustable spring perches. You can run them up, run them down, so that way you can set your ride heights. You can do corner weighting if you're more into track days, if you're more into really fine-tuning the ride quality and handling of your car. The other thing about the damping is that, as I mentioned before, with these springs, they do allow you to run either the track or the sport spring rates. So there's nothing terribly complicated about it. They are very standard, just click style knobs for the damping adjustment. Oh, thank you, Travis. And for the spring perches, there we go. They do, all of these kits do include some nice spanner wrenches or spring perch wrenches sometimes, depends on who you're talking to. They're very simple. They just have little spring-loaded mechanisms, and you just use it like a little clamp-style wrench where it hooks into the groove, and then you can spin it one way or the other, depending on if you need to rotate this to lift it up or rotate it the other direction to put it back down. So very simple in adjustment. There's nothing complicated or exotic about it. These guys do have a regular spring perch, and then they have a slightly smaller lower ring. This is the locking ring. So once you set your spring perch where you want it ride height wise, then you can use these spanner wrenches to give just a little bit of a snug on the lower locking ring. It doesn't take a whole bunch. You don't have to go Superman on it. Just enough to snug it up. But that's what these guys are for. Damping adjustments, you know, with a knob, super easy clicks. We actually have recommended settings for both the ride height and the damping settings in our instructions. So you don't have to guess too much. You can certainly feel free to play with your ride height a little bit or with the dampen adjustment as you see fit, but we do give you recommendations on where to start. Overall, very easy, very straightforward to set up as far as coilovers are concerned. Let's see. Another question we get a lot about the VMax coilovers is, does this fit my NA, whatever year? Does this fit my NB, whatever year? The short answer is yes. All of these shocks are actually the same for NAs and NBs. The only difference is that if you're shopping on our website and you see the difference in price and you're like, what the heck? Well, that's because on the NA kits, we include NB upper mounts, the bushings, the washers, and basically this upper hardware to allow you to bolt in this coilover into your NA. So if you already have NB upper hats or whatever because you're switching between a different suspension already, you could actually save a few bucks and buy the NB version of the VMaxes and just reuse your stock NB upper mounts. Or if you have an NB and you're like, I don't want to reuse any of this stuff up here, you can buy an NA kit. It's the exact same parts, no big deal. I will warn you that because we sell this as a coilover package and what we call our stage 2 kit, that includes sway bars, and the sway bars are specific for the different chassis. So if you are looking at possibly buying an NA kit for your NB or NB for your NA because you do or don't need these mounts, just make sure that you're buying just the coilovers and you can get the sway bars separately. Or if in doubt, again, give us a call. We'll make sure to get you sorted out with what you need for your car. The other thing that's pretty cool about these guys, and especially with those of you that like to run very low ride heights, there's somebody off camera who he's looking off in the distance trying to ignore me, but that's okay. If you like to run, real low ride height because, you like the stancy look, and that's cool. No big deal. These are actually a pretty good coilover for that because not only do the adjustment, basically the threaded portion of the shock body go really, really far down the shock body itself, so you can really get your springs low. On these rear shocks here, you might actually be able to tell on camera that they all have kind of a funny placement for that lower bushing. They are offset, and that's not on accident. We do that because you have a left or a right, but this offset basically pushes your shock over to give you more clearance for your axle. Because if you go low enough on shocks that don't have an offset or, don't have really, really, really skinny springs and perches, you'll actually have that perch run into your axle if you go too low. So on these VMaxes, all of them, Classics and Xtremes, they all have an offset perch, and there's a right and a left. So that way, if you want to go lower, you have room for it. Now, do we like going that low usually? Typically, you do start to run out of compression travel, and it's not quite as comfy, but VMax is actually, compared to quite a bit of other options on the market, generally do tend to have a bit more travel and tend to handle that lower ride height better than some other options. So if you're looking to go low on a budget, these are not a terrible option. Let's see, beyond that. Okay, so we start getting into some of the questions here. Before I jump into that, I will mention that these shocks, they are built to a price point. They're very good bang for buck, very good value. That being said, they're not cheap necessarily. They are not, exotic materials and stuff like that, but they do have good quality manufacturing behind them. As I mentioned, I think that we've been carrying them for at least a decade, if not maybe a decade and a half or so. So we like them. We think that they're quite good for what they are without breaking the bank. They do have a 2-year warranty. So if you happen to have an issue where, something happens, a seal is leaky, or, manufacturing issue where something happens, whatever, you do have that warranty. So within 2 years, give us a call, send us some pictures of the problem. We'll get you helped out. And we stand behind these products. Several of our FM employees actually run these on our personal cars. So they are good products that we do like to use even on our own stuff. Let's see. I didn't actually talk about the fronts much, so let's move over here for just a moment. So these fronts, as you can tell, they're longer looking shocks, but they're essentially the same style as the rears. And you can tell Classic versus the Xtreme shocks, where it has the damping adjustment knob here. I only have just the Classic and the Xtreme, I think, track on these guys. And just to showcase that they look awful similar, not really a whole bunch to notice, other than that on the fronts of the Classics and even the Xtreme Sports, we actually use only a single spring rather than a primary spring and helper like we do on these other ones. And the reason being is that we found actually on some of the NBs, like NB2s in particular, that were a bit heavier in the front, or even sometimes NAs with turbo kits or other things that made them a bit front heavy. We found that a longer primary spring actually helped prevent coil bind and keeping them off the bump stops compared to a slightly shorter helper spring and primary spring arrangement like what we do on the heavier rates of the track spring setups. So if you see that, you get a Classic or a Sport kit and you only have one big long spring on the front, but you have 2 separate springs on the rear, you're good. That's actually by design. We used to do it 2 different springs on the Sport and the Classic kits in the past, but after years of driving them and testing them and having feedback from lots of different friends and customers, we eventually decided that this design actually works a little bit better. So it's not wrong, it's just a little different. But otherwise, the shocks are pretty much the same looking between the two. Again, just the damping knob that's different between the Classics and the Xtremes. You can also see on these front shocks, because they are front shocks, they do have mounting points for ABS wires. So if your car is equipped with ABS from the factory, that's what these guys are. They're little standoffs, so that way your ABS wire doesn't have to just float around in space. You can actually bolt it down, so that way it's not flopping all over. Pretty easy peasy. Okay, beyond that, I think that that's pretty good on the whole differences between the shocks. So what other questions do we have? Oh, one of the questions we got in advance was talking about the damping adjustments. So just because we're here talking about it, what if I want to run my damping at like full stiff or full soft? Will that significantly shorten the lifespan of the shock itself? Not necessarily. So remember when I talked about earlier that these shocks, we actually tuned them for, or tuned the springs rather, for the shock damping that they have, the valving that's inside these guys, and that they're kind of close to the top end and the bottom end of the spectrum depending on which option you choose. So assuming that you are going to be using, let's just talk about the sports here, kind of closer to the bottom end of the spectrum for how soft or stiff you want to set your adjustment knob. As long as you're pretty close to that, one, the ride quality is going to be pretty good. Depending on your car, you may want to turn this up or down a little bit. And that pairing is going to work well, and the shock and the spring are going to work in harmony, and everything's going to be kosher. Now, if you turn the damping up really stiff on that same setup with these sport spring rates, it's going to feel overdamped, which one is not very comfortable. And two, is it going to wear out the shock a little bit sooner? Potentially. You are working that shock and basically making it resist the movement of compression more than it normally would, because that's generally what the spring's job is going to be. So yeah, maybe a little bit over the lifetime of the shock, but we're talking pretty small amounts. It's a pretty narrow window of adjustment for the damping control in these shocks. So it's not something I would worry about. I would be more concerned about the ride quality, because it's just, you turn it up too soft or too stiff, depending on your springs that you've chosen, it's just not going to feel nice. So I would worry about that more than the longevity of the shocks themselves. Okay. I think, the only other thing to note that we had questions about in advance is that if you're watching this right now live, we do have some of these kits on the shelf, and then a few of them also that are not. They're out of stock at the moment. And that's just because we actually are getting some more ready to go. It'll probably be a couple of weeks before they're on the shelves ready to be shipped out. So if the exact option that you want is not in stock at the moment, that's okay. Just be patient a couple of weeks and we should have more ready to go. I do recommend that you jump on that web page for whichever option you want and click the notification button, because that way we'll send you an email when they're in stock and you know that you can get them on order. I think that's all the questions I had in advance. Do we have any more that have come in that I haven't already answered?
Why do you not offer these for NC or ND?
Okay. So good question. Why don't we offer these for the NC and ND Miatas? Well, at the moment, these are well-tested solutions, and we like them quite a bit. We know that there is an NC option out there, and we have had limited experience with that one, but we haven't invested enough time into it to see if maybe dialing in the spring rates would be a good option that we could carry that. So at the moment, it's simply because we haven't tested the waters on the other two generations. If you think that at this price point, this would be something that you would want for your NC or ND, something around what are these guys? I think they're just sub $1,000, depending on like the Xtremes. If you guys are into that and think that that would be a good price point for us to look into for coilovers such as the VMaxes for NCs and NDs, let us know. Drop us a comment, and if it's something that enough people are that interested in, yeah, we will probably keep looking to see if there's an option that we can make work. Now, VMax is a known good supplier. They do a lot of great stuff. As I mentioned, we've been carrying these for a lot of years. So we are more than happy to work with them if that's something that people would like to do. So let us know. There's not a cut, clean answer there. But drop us a line if you think that this price point would be attractive for what you're trying to do with your NC or ND. Do we have anything else? Okay. All right. Well, I will stop it there because otherwise I could go on and on and on, as you know. Thank you very much for your attention. We really appreciate you watching. If you like these kind of videos, be sure to give us a like, subscribe. That way you know when the next video is going to come out. We'll talk about all kinds of things. It might be suspension, might be clutches, might be turbos, might be who knows what. So if you'd like to know, of course, do all those social media things so that way you can see us next time when we do the next FM Live video. It'll be next Thursday, same time, same place. And again, if you have any more questions about any of this stuff, feel free to reach out to us via phone call, email, social media, that kind of stuff. We'll walk you through whatever you need. I will mention that links to all of these will be in the description below. So if you're curious about any of these options, we'll leave you some links so that way you can jump on there and check them out on our website. As always, if you have any suggestions for what to talk about next, drop those in the comments below too, because all of this stuff is generally things that we're talking about because you have asked, and we thank you very much for that input. But until next time, thank you very much. We appreciate it. See you then.